title of the fourth presentation of this series of 8 is The Economics of Equality. This presentation was given after ZDAY London with an organisation called the Equality Trust. To find out more about the Trust and their proposals, please check out the link for Sean Baines' presentation at ZDAY 2013 in the description for this video. It will also help to give some context to this presentation as well, so it is recommended to be viewed prior before continuing on. Needless to say, the evidence compiled by the Equality Trust helps to outline why inequality is a social pollutant and is at the heart of most social ills. The aim of this presentation will not be to focus heavily on the corrosive effect that inequality has on a given population, as it is well laid out by the Equality Trust, but will instead attempt to decipher the root causes of inequality to see if the causal mechanisms behind this issue could be surpassed with a new socio-economic model to stop history from repeating itself. Firstly, it's worth noting that this is not the first time society has faced growing inequality. From medieval times and the plutocratic rule of monarchies to the slave trade, and the extreme poverty of the early Industrial Revolution to the growing inequality we see today, the story of society is one told through the prism of inequality. Whilst it is indeed true that many of us have a far higher standard of living than a king would have had 100 years ago, it is not enough to say that we should therefore all simply be happy now. There is more to being human than simply enough food in your belly, a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and modern amenities. Not that the issue of absolute poverty is by any means solved for a significant portion of humanity, of course. Still, in developed nations where our basic needs are met, there still appears to be something missing. The promise that economic growth and materialism could and would meet all of our needs has not come to pass. We are still not happy with issues such as stress, depression, diabetes, and heart attacks on the rise, to name but a few. What the studies on income inequality show is that we are hugely relational creatures, and if we live in a society where our relationships are based on whether we feel looked down upon or are the one doing the looking, our collective physical and mental well-being is dramatically affected as a consequence. Inequality is the greatest challenge for modern society to address, as it is intrinsically linked to all the other problems we face today, from environmental degradation to political corruption, poverty, and war. Whilst it is right to focus on its effects with regards to specific countries, it is also important to appreciate the issue in a global sense, as we now live in a more interconnected world than ever in terms of travel, population, environmental issues, and financially as well. So we must also observe the effects that growing income inequality is having on global society. The current state of wealth disparity globally is that 1% of humanity now own 46% of the world's wealth, a figure up from the previous 40%. 80% live on less than $10 a day, 50% on less than $3, and a sixth of the planet's human population are starving to death on less than $1.25 a day. The richest 85 people on this planet now have more wealth than the bottom 3.5 billion members of humanity. And when we observe this trend over time and compare the rate of all countries on Earth, we can see that there is indeed a steadily growing gap between rich and poor nations as well. So what are the factors responsible for this long-term trend, and where should we start in order to ask such a question? Part 1. The root causes of inequality. Considering the gravity of these results, the first and most important point to make, in my view, is that nothing involving societal structure or operation is unquestionable or out of bounds. This may seem like a rather obvious and reasonable proposition, but it is rather more difficult to do in practice, as we all have different reference points, associative memory patterns, and value orientation biases that will make it very difficult to be able to question absolutely everything about our social structure. Bear in mind that if I had said the world was not flat or the centre of the universe 2,000 years or more ago, then I would not have been given the time of day by anyone. There is no reason why a world is flat moment is still not awaiting us, as long as we are willing to take a far enough vantage point of perspective to do so, and follow the evidence where it leads us. So let's list and bring into focus the major features of global societal governance in operation today. the use of a monetary system, business, commerce and the free market, government and politics, the media and education. Let's run down this list to see how each of these plays a role in creating income inequality. Money makes the world go round. Well, not quite, but it certainly means the difference between life and death for most. It is the primary driver of all social function, so it makes sense to start here. Money was adopted as a far more efficient method of transferring scarce goods and services than barter. An effective monetary system is one that facilitates the circulation of goods and services by allowing supply to meet demand through the price mechanism. The higher the demand, the more supply should rise to meet it, and vice versa. If supply cannot rise to meet said demand, then that good or service is deemed scarce and the price goes up to reflect this, and if it is abundant, then it goes down. The amount of money in a given society should reflect the amount of goods and services in circulation in the marketplace. We must then submit to employment to provide some useful contribution to other needs in society in order to earn enough money to meet our own. Competing against other producers in the market for market share, either by cutting corners on price or coming up with a new, desired idea, product or service. Therefore, the core intrinsic attribute of a monetary system is the need for some sort of scarcity, inefficiency and inevitably competition. This being based on the notion that there is not enough to go around and that to meet the population's needs we must submit to employment for income to address these inefficiencies and to compete with others in direct competition with us in the marketplace to do so. Just like any competitive situation, you will find winners, losers, differential advantage and gaming strategy. All factors that are intrinsic attributes to our current monetary market system, and all are conditions that reinforce and perpetuate division, self-preservation, differential advantage, and in turn, income inequality. Indeed, why not make things more scarce? After all, the more scarce something is, the more we can charge for it, right? Preservation and prudence are the enemies of profit. What our system requires is consumption, and the more of it, the better. This could be termed as cyclical consumption, which is the need for money to circulate between the three players on the economic stage: the employee, the employer, and the consumer. Goods and services must circulate at an ever-increasing rate to produce more money demand, keeping people employed and keeping the system going. The result being an economy that measures itself on growth. Of course, this notion is absurd as nothing can grow forever in a finite space. An economy based on growth is like making porn films to promote abstinence. The real-world effects of such doublethink are as follows. We will need 2 Earths by 2030 to keep on our current rates of consumption. The last remaining rainforest could be consumed in less than 40 years. Species are going extinct at roughly 1,000 times their normal rate due to human activity. Over 70% of the world's fish species are now disappearing at an alarming rate due to overfishing, and 99% of the materials used in the process for manufacturing of the goods on sale ends up as waste within 6 weeks. This is clearly not an economy, but an anti-economy. The gaming strategy and requirement for scarcity is built right into the money supply process itself, reinforcing competition and the need for growth through a practice known as fractional reserve banking. In this process, the vast majority of the money supply is created out of debt by private banks and not by the government. When you walk into a bank and ask for a loan, as long as there is enough money to satisfy the loan requirement, usually about 10%, then as much as 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air by the bank, with interest applied through subsequent loans in the banking system. This means that even if every dime, dollar, pound, rupee and shekel in existence were to be paid back to the banks tomorrow, then we would still owe the interest, so the debt will never, ever be paid off. It is essentially a game of musical chairs, and when the music stops, someone is always left out to dry. Trading money as a commodity in and of itself with no attachment to life-sustaining goods or services has become the order of the day, leading to the creation of speculative confidence-based bubbles in the market that are just waiting to burst. The derivatives bubble alone is estimated to be worth anywhere between $700 trillion and $250 billion, and the GDP of the global economy is only $60 trillion. As if all of this were not enough, the vast majority of humanity are left with even less in their pockets through the stealing of the value of what little money they do possess via the hidden tax of inflation. A tax that has always hit those with the least the hardest. The way this game is played means that anyone who has a bank balance in the black is because someone, somewhere, is in the red. Money can simply earn money in and of itself without any need to be tied intrinsically to the goods and services on sale in the marketplace, and with no consideration to environmental destruction or degradation. As if the debacle of the monetary system were not enough, the market system tightens the noose still further via the incentive for obsolescence in the manufacturing of the goods for sale in the marketplace. This could be expressed in two forms: intrinsic and planned obsolescence. Intrinsic obsolescence is when corners are cut on the cost of production to remain competitive in the marketplace, and planned obsolescence is when a product is made to deliberately break down to be resold in order to maintain required cyclical consumption, turning over a profit. All of which further exacerbate inequality, as typically the goods that last the least amount of time are the cheapest and precisely the products that the poor are condemned to buy over and over again, for they never possess the purchasing power to buy the ones that last, applying still more pressure on their already depleted funds. But why would business and commerce have a vested interest in making their goods or services abundant or render themselves and their business obsolete in favour of something more efficient? The answer is they wouldn't. In fact, in a competitive system such as ours, even a business with good intentions would have to get a machine to do a human's job if the competition do so in order to remain competitive. This could be termed as technological unemployment. Although this is largely ignored by the media, it is in fact the largest historical threat to the labour for income game. And when the future exponential trends in technological development are taken into account, the largest future threat to the labour market as well. This is why technological unemployment is also referred to as the contradiction of capitalism, because who is going to buy all this stuff and keep the infinite growth economy going when the vast majority of the population do not have jobs to earn the money to do so? It used to be the case that humans could retrain to take up positions in the market that were created by the new technology, but this trend is now changing in favour of this exponential trend in technological advancement. This has meant that in recent times, the higher paid jobs have gone to those who are more highly skilled in technological areas such as computing, and displacing manufacturing and service jobs. Typically jobs of the lower to middle class. The more highly skilled tend to be those from more affluent backgrounds who can afford a higher standard of education. This trend is another major contributor to inequality globally, according to a recent report by the OECD. The outcome of such a model of social operation has been the necessity to implement taxes and laws via government. Government can be either sinner or saint in the game of inequality, but taking the obvious buying of political favour through the legalised prostitution known as lobbying, the bank bailouts, and the dodging of tax that corporations seem to be able to achieve, it is easy to see it for what it is, an extension of the market itself. Some say that government itself is the problem, and that were we to let the market resolve society's issues through the price mechanism, it would work just fine. But this is to isolate one entity from the other, when neither exist inside a vacuum. Government has never been free from the interest and influence of business. Even with the document that advocated for the smallest government possible in the form of the Declaration of Independence, business interests are evident, and perhaps more so than any other country. For whilst all men are created equal, the slaves who toiled to reap the profits for the writers of that document were apparently not quite as equal. Whilst reinforcing conditions are still operative in society, then any desired effects or moral impositions are just that. Technological unemployment, planned and intrinsic obsolescence, self-preservation tendencies, and the inherent competitive gaming strategy and gravitation towards cartels and monopolies are inherent to and the outgrowth of the free market system, and are not merely the fault of government control. They are in fact the reason for the need of government to be a referee through the inefficiency and problems that this competitive system creates, as it is not equipped to be able to take into account externalities to a particular arena of trade to which businesses may be engaged in, even if they do have the best intentions of their employees and customers at heart. They must pay attention to these externalities to remain in business. Such a problem-inducing social order must be held together by something, so the need to pass laws and regulations rather than deal with the reason for them in the first place will always be an issue in a price system. Laws are essentially a way to offset dealing with a problem we either do not know how or are unwilling to solve. You can call the government something different, and how society would work just fine without one if everyone would simply uphold the non-aggression principle, observe and uphold individual responsibility, property rights, and show moral integrity, but this is to completely ignore the aforementioned design flaws inherent to the scarcity-based economics and the structural violence it perpetuates. So if your social model perpetuates competition, inequality and scarcity by design, then you will, I'm afraid, never have lasting equality. Just because you wish it to be the case does not make it so. A system is what it produces, not what you want or demand it to produce. So if we wish to see an end to the need to even have to fight for greater income equality, then we must build a system that addresses the root cause of the problem, or we are simply engaging in patchwork, misplaced sentimentality, and wishful thinking. In the words of futurist and social and industrial designer Jacques Fresco, whatever happens is real. What you think should happen is unreal, and that's what people get disappointed in. Besides, if government and the state were the chief protagonist of all society's problems, then wouldn't it surely follow that Sweden would have the worst societal health of all developed nations, as it has far more state involvement and higher levels of taxation in the running of its society than other developed nations? However, it is one of the healthiest countries in which to live, both in terms of physiological and psychological health. The sort of societal governance we use today to deal with social problems is politics, which is itself an established institution with established interests to uphold in any of its incantations. Whether it's democracy, socialism, communism or fascism, all are ultimately variations on picking your choice of coercion. Some ways feel nicer than others, and some are demonstrably better than others, but all come with the need to serve the interests of a selection of one sector of society who may serve your interests whilst omitting other sections that do not. Furthermore, the self-preservation tendencies surrounding the very idea of separate nations competing with each other leads to a creation of a psychology of inequality and division by design, as is evident from the aforementioned growing gap between rich and poor countries earlier. The ultimate aberrant expression of this nationalistic jingoism and scarcity-orientated competitive gaming strategy is war. This planet spends what it would cost to feed every starving person on it for a year in just 8 days on war. Something that again perpetuates inequality as well as economic warfare against some of the poorest nations on Earth. If the nation in question will not open its borders willingly to allow the major corporations to reap the rewards from its natural resources, then the money powers can always trade down the value of its currency and send in economic hitmen to coerce its leaders in an attempt to get what their country wants. If all else fails, then an excuse is given for war so that the attacking country can blow stuff up, send in their corporations to rebuild it, stealing said nation's natural resources and reducing the value of its currency, reaping the benefits of its cheap labour. It's not a conspiracy, it's just what our system produces. As for media and education, these are supposed to be the cornerstone of a truly democratic society. It is not enough that people have a vote and mob rule wins. There are clear stipulations to most modern democracies, and one of them is the need of the population to have a decent grasp of the running of their society enough to enable them to vote for the most worthy candidate. If this is the case, then why is critical thinking, the teaching of logical fallacies, and the questioning of illegitimate authority not top of the agenda in our school curriculum? because culture reflects education and education reflects culture. One cannot survive without the other. And the media is now owned by the same few corporate interests, so the information and rhetoric they present, not surprisingly, largely reflects the interests of the dominant control group in society. The biggest 6 corporations now control 90% of the media in America, for example, whereas it used to be 50 in 1983. This is why so much of the information expressed so far in this lecture does not make the newspapers. It is too far outside the parameters of debate. Something eloquently expressed by Noam Chomsky in the following quote: "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum, even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate." If the media really were doing their job, you might think that the trial of agencies of the American government in 1999 for the killing of Martin Luther King might have made headline news. But both the trial and the fact the guilty verdict handed out to said agencies by a mixed-race jury after only 1 hour of deliberation of the 7th most popular American of all time and leader of the civil rights movement was hardly even mentioned. And if the supposed critical thinking public were doing their job, you might think that after being informed of the taped assassination of the most wanted man on planet Earth, Osama bin Laden, by the American military, that they might have at least demanded to see some footage, a body, DNA samples from the blood at the scene, or frankly any shred of evidence before accepting the validity of such claims. But no, nothing. Most just swallowed it, hook, line and sinker. I am not saying I know whether they did this either way, and frankly, I do not personally care if they did or did not. However, I do care that people believe anything the media and the government tell them with no basis in evidence, because that does have an effect on the kind of society we all have to live in. If we do not have critical thinking skills, then we are there for the taking. This is the kernel seed of inequality. Because if you cannot surmount an intellectual defense against illegitimate authority, then you can be fooled into thinking that that's just the way it is and has to be, much like slaves did. Things have not actually changed as much as we would like to think, unfortunately, as debt is really the new slavery. The difference is that in this version of slavery, we get to buy our own house. After paying for it 3 times over to the bank, of course. But along with the promotion of critical thinking skills comes the risk that if we use them to ask important questions about our social system's problems and the long-term solutions needed to address the root cause of these issues, we may well end up challenging some of our most deeply held and cherished beliefs, customs, and values. But if we are brave enough to have these challenged and accept where we may have been mistaken, then we may be able to start to adopt a new frame of reference and thinking regarding social problem solving, ushering in a new age of prosperity. So the choice seems clear. We can have an economic system geared towards preserving our planet's finite resources and meeting human needs, or we can continue to use our scarcity-orientated, inefficient one, but we cannot have both. For example, even with our current woefully inadequate and inefficient food production methods, we could feed the billion members of our human family currently starving to death on this planet with less than 25% of what the US and Europe throw away in food alone each year. Money is a tool to express scarcity and inefficiency and not an immutable law of nature. We made it up, and we can now surpass the technical need for its use. What is required is not a violent revolution or to jail a few bankers or corrupt politicians, but the implementation of a technical plan on the back of a non-violent critical mass movement of the sorts the world has never seen, to render the use of money technically obsolete, ushering in a new age of access abundance for all the world's people. Scientist and engineer Buckminster Fuller put this sentiment best when he said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model, that makes the existing model obsolete. A system designed with these attributes in mind could be called a natural law resource-based economy, or NLRBE for short. The definition of such an economic model is the application of the scientific method for social concern. If we do not have an alternative economic model rooted in the best decision-making process we have ever come to know of, applied to the natural world in which we exist, then I am afraid we are simply condemned to repeat past errors and misunderstandings over and over again. The problems we face today cannot be solved through competition and irrational methods of problem solving such as politics, business, law, money, religion, or simply asking everyone to subscribe to the idea of peace and collaboration. We need a technical and not a political plan to address the reason behind the existence and persistence of these problems. In the words of Carl Sagan, the old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism and to rabid nationalism are beginning not to work. A new consciousness is developing, which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We must come to understand that it is in all of our interests to unify rather than divide. We must eradicate the need to demonize the rich for doing the best in a game that we all support through our collective, distorted societal values that we place upon positions of contrived prestige, money, wealth, prosperity, and power. It's not communism, it's common sense. Communism never had a technical plan to eradicate the cause behind aberrant behavior or societal problems, and still revolved around the need for politics, prisons, police, and force. The only association here is an associative one. Communism says share because it is a nice thing to do. We say share because everyone owning one of everything is inefficient, wasteful, and stupid, causing a huge amount of social stress and aberrant behavior which only increases human suffering. It's not the business of this presentation to go through the tenets of an NLRBE, as it has been gone through in other movement materials. However, it is worth noting that the levels of efficiency and abundance that could be produced by such a system are staggering. Whether it is clean and renewable maglev train systems that can travel at speeds of up to 4,000 miles per hour safely and use just 2% the energy of planes, or the hundreds of times more efficiency that can be achieved in food production via the use of hydroponics and vertical farming, it's easy to see how out of date our current system now is. Part 3. From unequal division to equality through diversity. This plan is not a utopia, there's no such thing, there never was, and there never will be. But we are either going to use evidence derived from our careful examination of the natural world to orientate society, or we are going to rely on rhetoric and opinion. Whilst we should of course be working towards the aims of the Equality Trust, it should not be divorced from the longer-term vision of a world that refuses to support the values that continue the perpetuation of the have and the have-nots. An NLRBE would not mean that everyone has to have the same thing or that everyone has to be good at everything. It is in our diversity that we find strength, and it is our current system which stifles this by forcing us to do things we hate to make ends meet. How we can tell our children to share, care for others and follow their dreams, whilst reminding them that even with all the marvellous technology at our fingertips, they still have to earn their right to life by depriving their fellow human family and keep a straight face, is beyond me. The NLRBE would release this hidden potential and diversity in concert in a way never before witnessed in human history. We excel when we are doing what we love, and the only time money matters is when you want someone to do backbreaking labour faster, which can now be done by machines. That is what technology is for, to help make life easier so that we can play. What we need is creative thinking to solve problems, and when more money is on the table, it actually makes us worse at doing this. The time has come for us to change. So how do we get from here to there? Well, the first step is learning more about this direction, which you can do at the following websites, remembering to not believe a word I or anyone else says. If the claim does not stand up to evidence, then drop it. If after this exploration you cannot find fault with the idea, then begin enjoying the positive experience of spreading the word about an alternative direction in which humanity could head, simultaneously shifting your behaviour away from anything that supports this system as best you can. It is possible that you will never escape this system's dictums, but it does not mean that you have to agree with it. The most fantastic joy I've ever experienced in my life is when I am doing what I'm passionate about and that is in line with my values, and not when I am just thinking of the money. I submit that if you are only doing it for the money, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons in the first place. The question is not one of whether we can get there, because there is no there. There is only here and now and what we are willing to stand for in each and every one of those moments that add up to a life. As Mohandas Gandhi once said, we but mirror the world. All the tendencies presented in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do. Or common misquoted but more concise version, be the change you want to see in the world. Because for a long time now, the world's religious leaders, philosophers and writers have been proposing notions of how the world can become a more peaceful, happy and joyful place in which for us all to live. But the ability to technically achieve the abundance required for such a globally collaborative system was never a reality until now. We've achieved so much as a species, and to our knowledge are the greatest evolutionary success story this universe has ever created. Quite simply, we are amazing, and together there is nothing we can't do. We've changed before, and we can do it again, but not without effort. So I'm afraid the first change has to start with you, not someone else. In the final analysis, we are one people, and we share one planet.